It's just after noon Central Time, which means it's my privilege to welcome you to today's Alumni Career Webinar, Negotiation, presented by Emily Whitman, Easton. My name is Maggie Almarakli, and I'm the Assistant Director of Career Programs here at the Alumni Association. The Alumni Career Programs Office is committed to helping provide alumni with the resources they need to stay competitive in an ever-changing job market and support the alumni community with career resources, networking channels, and job search capabilities. Today's webinar is co-hosted by UChicago Grad, an office committed to serving the graduate and postdoc community, focusing on recruitment, skills and experience, career development, and alumni engagement. Today's webinar is presented by UChicago alumna Emily Whitman Easton. Emily received both her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Chicago in 2001 and is currently the Associate Dean of Students at the Physical Sciences Division here at the university. In today's webinar, you'll learn strategies for tactful and diplomatic negotiation, as it's important to understand what you are worth as a job candidate and how not to alienate individuals who will soon be your managers. Emily will also leave time to answer your questions at the end of today's presentation. So let's get to the reason we're all here today, and let me welcome Emily.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this webinar. I am so excited to be here and talking on this topic. When UChicago Grad let me know that there was a little bit of an 80s movie theme going on, I immediately chose The Jerk, which technically was released in 1979, as I'm sure you all know. But it's such a great metaphor for negotiation, especially because I think sometimes negotiation makes people feel like they are being jerks. And so it was just a perfect kind of set of images to go along with what we're going to be talking about today, and to hopefully make you all feel more comfortable preparing to and actually participating in negotiations. So let's jump right in. This is the fifth part of the March Term Career Series, so you guys have perhaps already gone through the other 4 sessions. A little bit about my background and why I'm here doing this. I started in career services working with students very closely on all aspects of job preparation. And one of the things that I noticed was that while students put a lot of time into their resumes and documents and preparing to interview, very few of them had the skills they needed when they actually got a job offer to be able to command the kind of support that they would need from that job. And a lot of them were really afraid of negotiations because negotiations are scary. It's a difficult conversation to have, and especially if you're not sure how to have it, it can feel very intimidating. And after all of the stress that goes into getting a job, when you finally reach that final point, it can be very tempting to just say, okay, and go with what you got because you're so happy to have gotten it. But it's really essential that you are, in fact, advocating for yourself at this stage. So as I was working in career services, I started building a really extensive library of the best advice I could find on negotiations so that I could start advising my own students better. And over time, that evolved into a presentation that has been very helpful for a lot of people and hopefully will be just as helpful for you. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about why you should negotiate. Having this in the front of your mind as you're put in this position is definitely going to help you when it actually comes up. I'm going to go through some negotiation basics, some very basic ground rules that tend to apply to all negotiations that you can use to your advantage when you're in this situation. I'm going to talk about how you prepare to negotiate. There is a lot of work into knowing what it is you should be asking for, how you should be asking for it, and what you should expect to receive in return. So I'm going to talk through all of the preparation that you should be doing as you find yourself in a position to be negotiating for yourself in the coming months or weeks. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the conversation itself, some basic communication techniques you can use to hopefully help yourself advocate for what it is you need from any given position. A quick note on this, I have focused my presentation on negotiations in a job offer scenario, which is a little bit different than the tactics that you would use if you were in an existing job planning to negotiate for a higher salary. Now, I will talk a little bit about why the job offer scenario can be a more ideal circumstance to be having these conversations, but that said, it's really just a different approach. Both contexts offer you different privileges, and at the end of the presentation, if there's time, I can definitely talk a little bit more about what it's like to negotiate when you're already in a job and need to try and do a little better. So the first big reason on why to negotiate is, how much do you think negotiators on average make compared to their peers who tend not to negotiate, even just in starting salary and benefits conversations? Most studies point to $600,000 over the course of a career. And that does not include the benefits that come along with negotiation. Now, it's important to note, obviously, people aren't necessarily making this $600,000 as a better offer on top of the salary they've been offered, but it's important to think about the long game when you think about negotiations in a starting job salary. You will never have more power to command a higher paycheck than when you have a job offer on the table and somebody wants you to come and work for them. Over time, as you think about job after job after job, every future raise, every future starting salary will be based on the starting salaries that you begin with. So each time you're negotiating, you're not just negotiating for the job that you're in, but you're negotiating a starting salary that will have a very long-term impact over the entire life of your career. So each and every time you are in this position, it is imperative that you take advantage of it and you're prepared to do so. And again, this $600,000 doesn't include benefits like more retirement contributions or better health insurance, all of which have a very clear impact on both your finances and your personal well-being and are not included here. So please think about this big, huge number and think about how you're going to feel in a few decades when you are still negotiating, how much better it will feel to be at a higher position then. So more on why to negotiate. This is standard practice in nearly all professions for a starting salary. It is expected in almost every case that you will not accept a starting offer. It's very, very common to come into a situation and not take what they give you, but instead to push back. So you shouldn't be concerned about having these conversations. In most cases, they are very expected. There is, as I mentioned, a significant impact on your lifetime earnings. You should definitely be thinking about that long game instead of just the job you're in. Negotiations are about more than money. Now, money tends to be the thing that we focus on the most because money is often the most difficult topic to talk about. And it's also in negotiations the point of the most conflict. So for those of you who have ever been on the hiring side of a negotiation, you know that you're usually trying to get any given employee to work for you for the lowest amount possible, whereas when you're on the employee side of things, you're trying to command the highest salary. So that's why most of this presentation and a lot of presentations on negotiation tend to stress how to have the conversation about that actual salary number. But it's important to remember that that number is one of a lot of different pieces that you can be advocating for. And the more things that you are willing to negotiate on, the more opportunities you have to get a package that's going to make you happy in your new job. In short, it's about the stuff. It's about health insurance. It's about your working conditions. It's about what other resources and privileges you're going to need to be a productive and successful employee that can manage your job expectations while also having a fulfilling life outside of that job. So again, think big and broad as you're starting to think about what it is really going to make the difference for you. So I've got some basic rules here, and these are actually rules from Deepa Malhotra, who's at the Harvard Business School. These are kind of the 4 basic of negotiation that you should keep in mind in any negotiation, whether this is at a starting salary or whether this is trying to buy a car. There's a 4, or there's more than this, but the 4 top rules are as follows. They have to like you. This is the #1 rule of negotiations, that any time that you are conversing with someone and trying to persuade them to do better for you, you are in effect asking them to go back to their own boss or their own HR office or whoever it is to advocate for you on your behalf. And that is not going to happen if they do not like you. Likability is a key factor in being a successful negotiator. They have to be willing to put in the extra work it is going to take to advocate for you. And in some cases, especially in a hiring context, it's important to remember that this extra work may be on top of the extra work that they are doing to fill your position's absence while you are in this process. So it's incredibly important that throughout your conversations, you remain likable. If you've gotten this far in a job offer stage, chances are you've already done this already. But again, negotiations are difficult because people feel like they may become less likable by doing so. It's your job to have these conversations tactfully, respectfully, and graciously so that you maintain your likability while still advocating for yourself. I know I personally have definitely a conflicted relationship with negotiations, as I give these presentations all of the time, but actually in these situations, it can be very difficult to advocate for yourself, and I am not unsympathetic to that. I am not someone who loves conflict by any means. And so one of the ways that I like to approach it, and that's worked for me in the past, is to remind the person that I am negotiating that it is important that I do as well as I can so I'm best able to take care of my family. And I like that approach because for me, it reminds the person that I'm talking to that I'm not just thinking about myself and my needs, I'm thinking about a group of people that I have committed to support. And that best reflects my approach to my own life, but also reminds the person that I am not just a self-centered jerk who is in it to make as much money as I possibly can and hoard it all away like Scrooge McDuck. So this is one way that you can think about approaching it. Another reason to be very careful to make sure that you maintain likability in this process is there's a decent chance in some professions that you are negotiating with your future boss. And you are in fact setting some very important groundwork for your relationship moving forward. Even if you're negotiating with an HR representative that you may never see again though, it's important that they like you if you are asking them to advocate for more resources on your behalf. The next rule is they have to think you deserve it. There has to be a clear argument for the fact that you are worth not only the extra thing you are asking for, but the extra work that it is going to take to get it for you. And the challenge that some people fall into is that in trying to satisfy rule number 2, they forget about rule number 1. Nobody likes someone who gives a long and painful and pointed list of why they are the greatest person ever and deserves 3 times the amount of money that they were first offered. That said, as you are preparing to negotiate with someone, you need to make sure that the list of points that you will be bringing up in that conversation each have a clear and easy to follow rationale. You have to show your homework that you're not just pulling things kind of out of the sky that you think might make you happy, that in fact you're thinking about the needs of the organization and you are thinking about why it is that you are in fact worth more to them than they may have initially thought about. Rule number 3, they have to justify it internally. Almost nobody is allowed to make professional decisions in a vacuum. It's just not how most business is done. If you find yourself in one of those situations, you may be very lucky. But again, in most jobs, whoever you are negotiating with is going to have to bring this to a larger group of people who are going to also have to approve it. So if you're asking for something that's not possible or doesn't exist there, it can be very difficult to persuade a group of people. For example, if nobody makes more than $100,000 at the company and you're asking for $200,000, that's going to be a difficult justification internally. So here's where it pays to really know the organization you are negotiating with very well. You want to know a little bit about what the existing packages are, what the benefits are, so that you make sure what you're asking for fits with the kind of company credo that you're working with. And number 4, they have to find flexibility. All things are not possible. It may be you would like a higher salary and there just may not be the budget for that. It may be that you would like to work from home 4 days out of 5, but your position is a receptionist, and so you actually have to be able to sit at a desk. When you are presenting your offer, giving people more options on what you are willing to negotiate gives them the flexibility to give you more of what you want. So there has to be the opportunity for give and take in this process. That said, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the future, you want to have your priorities. This doesn't mean that you should take whatever they give you when they counteroffer, but it does mean that if you're able to provide them some flexibility on what they offer you to make you happy, they're going to have more opportunities to give you what you want. So all of these rules are designed to make it easy for them. And this is a little counterintuitive. Again, people come into negotiation situations really thinking that this is going to be an intense conflict where people are competing with each other and it's going to be difficult and challenging. And that said, it may be very difficult. It may be very challenging. But if you can keep in mind your audience as you're having these conversations and make it easy for them to both present, counteroffer, and justify what it is they're advocating, it's much more likely that they're going to be able to give you what you need and want to be a productive, happy employee. You know, there's a whole school of negotiation that talks about the fact that, you know, this really isn't conflict. I have some mixed views on that, but I can agree that a successful negotiation results in a win-win for everybody, which is to say They've found someone that's going to be a great employee for them. You've found a job that's hopefully going to leave you professionally and personally fulfilled. If you can find the right terms to agree on how you should be compensated, everybody's going to walk away from this happy. So you want to make it as easy to get there as you possibly can. So you do that with some preparation. Here's how you prepare to negotiate. All of this is going to happen before the offer, possibly even before you start applying. It's up to you. First off, in a job interview situation, in a job application process, you never, ever, ever, ever discuss salary. You specifically don't bring it up in an interview context because it's presumptuous. If you haven't been offered a job, then talking about how much they're going to compensate you to do said job makes an assumption about your qualifications that very few people will be excited or happy to hear. So you never discuss salary before. You also do your best to never give a number. Now, this can be very tricky, especially with online job applications, because as I'm sure a lot of you have run into, lots of job applications will ask you to provide either your current salary or a previous salary, or even the salary that you would expect to do this job. And you want to get out of doing this whenever you possibly can. There's a few ways you can game the systems. Sometimes you can get away with entering a 0. Sometimes you can get away with answering a range of salaries, which is good. Even that, you want to do your best to avoid giving any sort of number at all. If you're feeling especially strong about the particular position that you're going into, you can also always contact the HR office and discuss why you don't want to give a number in the job application. But whenever possible, you want to get around doing this, because once you've given a number, you've set a mental anchor for your audience to know where they should negotiate. And ideally, you want them to do that, because if their number is higher than you would have ever thought to ask for, and you give a number that's lower, that becomes the new anchor. That becomes the expectation on which all of your future negotiations are based. You want them to give you that number. So one of the questions that got sent ahead to a few of you asked this, and it's a great question, is what do you do if salary comes up in the interview? And this happens a lot. You'll be, talking about your great qualifications, and they'll say something to the effect of, well, what would it take for you to do this position? There's lots of ways not to answer this question. My personal favorite is, I really prefer to spend this part of the process deciding whether or not I'm going to be a good fit for the position. I'm really just focused on learning more from you on what it is you're looking for. I'm sure if you decide to move forward that I'm the right candidate, we'll be able to find a compensation package that's very fair. And that's it. You want to stress to them that you haven't even started thinking that far ahead, that really you're just in it to convince them that you're the right person for the job. Salary is secondary in your mind, even when it's not. But again, before you have an offer in mind, you don't want to give a salary right away. The reason is salary can stop a discussion right then and there. And if you haven't been made a job offer and you give a number that's too high or too low, not only are you setting that anchor where you don't want it, if the number's too high, you run the risk of not getting the job offer at all. And then that closes off a whole world of opportunity you could have had, even if the salary was low, to negotiate other benefits and perks that might have been just as important and make the job just as fulfilling and worthwhile for you. You don't even get to that stage, because in the interview, you gave them a number and they made an automatic decision based on that and only that. Don't put yourself in that position. Don't ever discuss a number until there's a job offer in place. And even then, you let them speak first. You want to use the interview to understand them. I hope some of you were able to go to the interview presentation yesterday, which I'm sure was terrific. One of the things that you can really do in the interview is you want to learn of the person that's hiring that position, what are the most important priorities they have for this job? What is it they're going to use to define success? What is it this job is going to do to make their job easier? You really want to know a little bit more about how this position stands to positively impact the person that you're negotiating with, because those are the points you will use when you are negotiating to speak to their interests on why you deserve a better package. So you really want to take a couple good questions. And again, you should be doing this so that you're able to speak to those from your own personal qualifications. But these are the pieces during the interview that you want to cull out so that you're ready to go and make a compelling argument that you are the right person that will be able to be very successful, do these kind of new things that the supervisor is looking for, whatever it is, so that they're more likely to want to get you and give you the package that it will take to do so. And then the other thing you want to do, and this is something you don't need to be in a job scenario or a job application process to do this at all. You need to figure out your financial scenarios. There's lots of different terms for these. This is the one that I chose to use. But this is basically the 3 packages that you have planned ahead of time that let you know what you need, what you'd like, and what is your wildest possible dream. So let's talk about those. What do you need to live? You need rent, you need food, you need utilities, you need transport, you need clothing, you need taxes, insurance, spending money, childcare, loans, etc. These are the things that you likely need to survive in the day-to-day world. This list is a little bit different for everybody. That etc. piece can be obviously, whatever you need it to be. But what you want to do is you want to figure out a baseline day-to-day of what it is you need to spend in the context you are planning to be in. One example, I have a very good friend who is a smoker, and he has to basically budget for cigarettes when he does these kind of projects, because it's unlikely he's going to quit smoking just because he can't afford it. And so when he builds what he needs to live, unfortunately at this point in his life, very expensive cigarettes in the city of Chicago is one of those things. But you're going to know what it is exactly that you need to get by. If you're in a current job situation, then ideally the what you need to live question is already answered. You should have a salary already, and you should hopefully be making your basic ends meet. So if you are, then this is your baseline. So think about what you need to live as the basic. This is just what you need to get by. Then there's the better. The better may not be the best, but the better is, what would it take for you to live more comfortably? What would it take for you to be incrementally happier? This is ideally what you're looking for. So as you find yourself in kind of the job exploration phase, the better is, what would make you just a little bit better off than you are now and would satisfy you? And this could be a combination of things. Maybe it's more flexible work hours. Maybe it is more time with your family, a better vacation package. Maybe it's better health insurance. Maybe it's earlier retirement buy-in. Whatever it is, the better salary-wise is generally going to be between 5 and 10%, possibly more, especially if you started off lower than you would like to be, possibly less, especially if you're making a little bit more or going through a career change where it's not necessarily going to be an equivalent position to what you have now, and you might need to take a little bit of a cut. But think about realistically, without a job offer in place, what would it take for you to do a little better? Revisit that list of needs. If your clothing budget is $200, but boy, you would really like to be shopping at some nicer stores, this is a place to put the better in, for lack of a better example. And then, of course, there is the best. This is your wildest dream package. Guys, I will just go ahead and tell you, if any of you know of a job that is hiring that pays a 6-figure salary with 8 weeks of paid vacation time and biannual trips to Tokyo, I am your woman. Please offer me this job, because this is the best of the best packages. And I'm being a little bit glib here, of course, to make a point, but you should definitely know, and this is a great time to do a little bit of soul searching and evaluation of your priorities as a human being and as a professional. Think about, what would the offer be that you would take without question? What are those longer term goals or those bigger picture things that you're really thinking about? And what would be that top of the line package that would really sway you to take something, because it really does have everything you want to live a very comfortable life? Now, of course, the question that I get when I do this session in person is, what happens if they offer you your best offer? Do you negotiate? Yes. You always, always, always counter offer. Even when they give you the best, there is always the chance to do better. So even if you get that 6-figure salary and 8 weeks of vacation, it could always be 12. And so you always want to make sure that you are pushing back just a little bit to do that counter offer, even if you know in your head it's a done deal. It doesn't matter. Think about those lifetime earnings. Think about how much just an extra couple $1,000s will end up being 40 years down the road, or 30 years, or even 5 years down the road. So during the offer, everything's gone well, you get that phone call or you get called in for that meeting. It is so exciting, your heart is racing, you might be a little nervous, but you get that phone call and it can be very, very difficult, especially if you have been on the job market for a while, especially if you are very anxious about getting a job. It can be very, very difficult to advocate for yourself at this stage. Again, you want to stay likable. You want to make sure you convince them you deserve it. But at this point, all you need to do is listen. When you get the offer, you say nothing. That can be very uncomfortable, as evidenced by the long pause I just took. When they make that salary offer, don't acknowledge anything. Don't nod, don't say yes, don't say no, don't say anything. Count to 10 quietly in your head. Assuming you're negotiating in the United States, we are a nation of talkers. And so most times, silence will make people so uncomfortable that they will rush to fill it, which means you'll be fine. They will say something. But if 10 seconds goes by and nothing has happened, you can acknowledge the offer with, and that's it. It's perfectly neutral. It's not positive. It's not. Wait for them to continue speaking. This can be read as a slight disapproval. It's mostly, again, because in a nation of talkers, when you're not talking, it is assumed that it is because you have something negative to say. That is not necessarily the case here, but what you're trying to do is make sure that you have the maximum amount of bargaining power later. So say nothing. Acknowledge the offer with the and then set a time to talk again. It is very, very common to take a few days to consider an offer and think it over. There are some job situations that are less likely to give you this. And I always encourage people to think about if you are in a position where you ask somebody for an amount of time to think over the offer before you reply and they say, no, I need an answer right now. Think carefully about whether or not this is someone that you would want to work for and this is a position that you're going to be comfortable. If the answer is yes, then you should be prepared for your negotiations at this stage. It is, again, though, very, very common practice for people to take time. I invoke the family. Again, I say, you know, I would really like the opportunity to talk to my husband about this just a little bit, like the opportunity to talk to my mentor about this a little bit. But really what you're just asking for is some time to get prepared for what your counteroffer is going to be. What's a reasonable amount of time to ask for? You can make it as little as 24 hours. That's certainly reasonable. I usually tend to ask for 48 hours or the next business day that's equivalent there. If I get an offer on Wednesday or later, I will sometimes push it as far as Monday. You want to be considerate about their needs in this time, but they should be able to grant you at the very least 24 hours. If they are saying we need to fill this position right away, consider this a negotiation beginning and a great opportunity to be a little bit flexible and to ensure your likability by offering to just take the minimum amount of time that you would need to be prepared. And if you've done a lot of this preparation ahead of time, this should be a snap for you. So once you've gotten off the phone, you want to jump right in so that you can prepare for your counteroffer. You're going to research the position. So there's great websites out there right now, Glassdoor.com, there's a few others where you can find salary information about positions like yours or even sometimes positions at the company that you're looking to work at. I see that there's a question about Glassdoor in here and I apologize, I'm trying to scan up to get it. Salary.com is another one. Someone is writing in that these resources are pretty useless. And, you know, unfortunately, self-reported data is notoriously unreliable. You have to be very careful when you use these sites that you are, in fact, looking at an equivalent job to yours. I know when I was negotiating my current position, I used this strategy. I went to Glassdoor.com and I researched other associate deans of students in the Chicago area and at this university and at Northwestern. And I came back to my boss with a counteroffer for the salary. And she had also done her Glassdoor research and said, it appears as though your estimate includes deans of students at business schools who are typically paid on average 20 to 30% higher than in academic fields like ours. And so your estimate is actually far too high. That was very embarrassing. Please don't let that happen to you. Please make sure that you are using this data with some amount of mindfulness that people can lie on these sites. Glassdoor does very little verification to make sure it's accurate. That said, they are a great starting place to start seeing what else is out there. But what else is out there? You can, in some cases, reach out to contacts. I encourage you to be judicious with this strategy, but if you do know other people who work at the organization and you have enough of a personal relationship with them that you would be comfortable contacting them, you want to be careful. Money can be a very sensitive topic for everybody to talk about, but you do want to try and understand who else has had this job? Do they know anything about this person? What were their qualifications coming in? And do they have any idea how they were compensated? Or is there an average range? You know, nobody ever talks about salary in explicit terms in most organizations, but that said, there's always a lot of kind of under the radar knowledge floating around. And so sometimes if you have a friend or a friend of a friend at an organization, they can be really valuable to give you that insider knowledge that you need. Again, be tactful, be respectful, and this is also self-reported data, so be careful. You can look at similar positions in other places. One of the great things about the internet is everything is archived for all time, and so you may be able to find similar positions that have been hired in your field, in your industry, that would also give you an idea of what range of salary was offered at that organization. I think this is really useful in places where salary ranges are more public knowledge. Oops, there was another one that I had here. Similar positions in other places, you can get more information on that from professional organizations as well. You can also look at the National Labor Bureau's statistics on what average salaries are for any given positions. It gets tough because when you start to work in these kind of averages, it's difficult to specify how much it might be in your area. But that said, this is also a good time to revisit your packages and start to adjust them for location and location in relation to you. So by revisiting your packages, let's say you are applying for a job in Omaha, Nebraska, where the cost of living is notoriously lower. Well, a job that pays $50,000 there is going to go a lot further than a job that pays $50,000 here in Chicago. So while you may have built your packages based on where you are now, especially if you're looking at a job for that you would be relocating for, you want to look and readjust those totals for what that might mean in that context. Someone else had also asked about how do you approach negotiations if you are changing fields? Sometimes when you're changing fields, and this can be very contextual depending on what field you're going from and to, what your experiences are here. Are you doing a whole change? Are you doing a partial change? But this may be a time to revisit your packages in light of your own qualifications to make sure that what you're asking for is not only fair for the industry, but it's fair for the industry with your experience level. You really want to try and find that magic fit between what you're actually worth in the marketplace and how close you can get to that in this actual package. And then you want to find your flexibilities. So we're going to go through the whole list of things that you can negotiate for on the next slide or two. But what you want to start to think about is what are your priorities and what are your flexibilities? One of the people that taught me to negotiate had a great phrase about giving away nickels while keeping your dimes. And this means of all of the things that you are prepared to negotiate for, you want to know what the top 2 or 3 are that are really going to make the difference for you. There is no point about negotiating for a parking space over and over if you're planning to ride your bike every day anyway. So what you want to do is figure out of all of the things that you're interested in discussing, what are going to be the handful that you really do want to try and make sure you get, and what are going to be the things that if you don't get them in the form you're offering or you don't get them at all, you can concede that this is not going to be a sticking point. And you have to think carefully about yourself in any given job before you do this. You have to think really carefully about what it is going to make the difference for you. You know, you always want to try and negotiate for a little more money because, as we've discussed, this has a cumulative effect over the life of your career. That said, there's no point in going back and forth with somebody about a job to try and get a higher salary if you're never going to move to Omaha, Nebraska, and they won't let you work from home. It's those kind of things that can sometimes prolong the negotiations process longer than it needs to. Figure out where you can be flexible with the person that you're negotiating with. And again, if you can find your flexibilities, they will hopefully be able to find flexibility with you and get you a better package. Okay, so what can you include when you negotiate? Well, obviously, salary, hours, time off, professional development, parking and transport, food, car, mileage, what kind of office you have, where it is, where are you working, when's your start date, and etc. I have friends and mentees who have successfully negotiated for all of these things. I have one friend who never leaves a negotiation without asking for an extra week of paid vacation every time he negotiates a job. And you know what? He gets it every single time. Car and mileage. If you're going to be expected to be driving anywhere, ask, would you be willing to cover up my mileage? Or would you be willing to purchase a vehicle on my behalf? In some cases, if the job posting said you need a car to do this, they're not going to buy you a car. But if there is a lot of expectation of travel, this is a great opportunity to ask what they're going to be able to contribute for this. Someone asked a great question about location, time off, and hours of how to negotiate family time and time for yourself without looking like you're a total slacker. This is very, very tricky. Industries are notoriously decentralized on how things like working from home are considered. I can tell you in the current institution I am at, working from home in my position is not necessarily encouraged. The last institution I had, it was totally fine. If you were in IT, if you were in tech, this is standard practice. If you are in customer service, it may not be. One strategy that I recommend, and this is useful in other perks that you want to ask for, but you may feel like it will compromise your presentation as a responsible employee, is to ask if after a set amount of time you could reopen the negotiations for these privileges. So this works in this way. During your negotiation, you say something to the effect of, obviously, I'm a parent with 3 children, and it's important that I am able to have X days to be at home with them for X, Y, and Z reason. That said, this position is going to be my priority for the next 6 months. What I'd like to propose is at my performance review in 6 months, in 3 months, in 2 weeks, after we've had a chance to work together and lay the groundwork for what our professional relationship is going to be, I'd like to reopen the conversation of working from home, or I'd like to reopen the conversation of flexible hours. If you're in a position where you absolutely need flexible hours or you can't take that job, unfortunately, you need to be upfront. That's one of those priorities that if your kid gets out of school at 3 and there is nobody to pick them up and no way for this organization to pay you a higher salary for childcare, or that's not an option for whatever reason, then that's going to be one of those priorities you need to stick to. However, there should be ways for you to propose this and give your employer the opportunity to work with you a little bit first and then make that decision. It is a really touchy conversation asking right off the bat, can you work less? But what you do want to keep stressing throughout all of this is the reason that you are asking for this and what they stand to gain by giving it to you. Is it that you will be more focused while you are at the office because you don't need to worry about where your children are going after school? Is it because if they're able to be flexible with you on hours, you're more than happy to make sure that you're checking email every Saturday for 3 hours, or whatever it is? You want to speak to their needs, not yours. Okay. So we keep going to the conversation itself. Remember, they have to like you. They have to like you. So you want to stay polite, you want to stay tactful, you want to stay respectful. Be gracious and be grateful. At the point that someone has offered you a job, they have likely made a decision from a huge group of candidates, not only for your professional qualifications, but also because they feel as though there's a good fit with you and this position and this organization, and possibly even them personally. This is not an honor to be taken lightly. This is something that you want to be very clear about. Open this conversation with thank you. Thank you for recognizing that I am the best person for this position. I am so enthusiastic about this, and I am confident we are going to be able to find compensation that we both think is fair and reasonable. That's one way. One of you wrote in with a question that I have never seen before about having had job offers rescinded at the negotiation stage. This is very rare, and to the person who wrote in this question, I am so sorry. That sounds terrible. I do not know what context this happened under, but I am sorry all the same. That is incredibly rare because at the point that you have made a job offer to someone, and again, people in hiring positions will know this, the point that you're making a job offer to someone, a whole bunch of people have had to sign off on this. There has been a lot of discussion usually. There's been a lot of conversation. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you are mindful of that, because nobody wants to go back to that table. Nobody wants to do more work to move to the second choice or third choice, depending on where you are in the roster. So you should go in with that confidence, but that said, being offered a job is an honor all the same. Make sure that you are mindful of that and communicate that clearly to the person you're negotiating with. Present your offer with a justification for each item that you're asking for. And ideally, when you're negotiating, every job is different, every situation is different, but ideally, you're looking at no more than 4 to 5 terms that you're negotiating on. That big, huge list I gave you, it's important that you have your priorities. Nobody likes negotiating with somebody who continues to go on with a very long list of, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. Again, think about the 4 to 5 things that are really going to make the difference for you to be happy and productive in this job. Think about the 2 to 3 that are your absolutely important ones, and then a few extras that you think would just improve your life overall, and then bring that as your package. Each and every one of those pieces should have a justification on why you're worth it. So if you are asking for a higher salary, now is the time to bring up your specific qualifications that speak to those needs that you learned about in your interview. Remember, you should have in your interview been asking, what is it they're specifically looking for? How is this position stand to support the organization and the other position? You want to remind them of those priorities and why you are, in fact, the best possible person to address them. Maybe it's because you were on these 3 working groups in your last position, and so you're uniquely positioned to help them with this merger. Or maybe it's because you actually did spend 6 years immersed in Brazil, and so your Portuguese is in fact fluent and perfect in the dialect they work in, and therefore you're worth a little bit more in this marketplace. Whatever it is, you want to make sure you justify why what you're asking for is actually something that is better for them to take. Even if that just means that you will be happier in this position for longer and they will not need to replace you as quickly, which is the implicit kind of value of everything you're doing. Again, prioritize. If you come to the table, this is a careful balance between offering and finding flexibility, but also making sure that you know what you want. Ideally, negotiations are going to go for probably 3, no more than 4 conversations. You want to be prepared for them to offer, you to counteroffer, them to counter-offer, and ideally at that stage, you should be ready to accept. If their counter-offer is really not what you want to accept, you can ask for more time. At that point, these conversations are going on a very long time. I once negotiated with someone who pushed me for 6 rounds. And by the final conversation, when she continued to come back to the table, after I had gotten her some of the things she wanted and the list kept getting longer, I really lost a lot of that likability for her, and it made it difficult to work with her moving forward. I felt like I had made a bad choice. You don't want to put your negotiating partner in that bad position. So make sure you know your priorities going in, and you know when it's okay for you to stop negotiating because the important things have been taken care of. Be open. You might ask for that extra week of vacation off, and they're not able to do that, but they are able to offer you 3 personal days and more time to work from home. They know their organizations often, unless you're an internal hire, they very likely know their organization better than you do. And so they know what's possible, but they also know what's not. If working from home would make you the most hated employee in the office, maybe that's not a perk you actually want, but maybe and hopefully you're working with someone who's willing to provide you a similar privilege with a different benefit. So be open to what they bring back to the table and hear them out to see if that in fact would serve your needs, maybe even better than what you initially asked for. And be patient. This can be really hard, especially if you've been looking for a job for a while and you are really anxious, having trouble paying your bills, or whatever situation you're in. These things can take time, and especially salary negotiations. Getting more money for a position can be an arduous process. And so what you want to do is don't pressure the person you're negotiating with too hard to try and come up with something right away. You want to be patient. You do want to ask for a timeline. You do want to reset a time to talk after you've counter-offered, but you don't want to make them feel as though they've got a ticking clock over their head. Nobody likes an ultimatum, and you have to stay likable. So, know what you need. I really did just want an excuse to use this photo. I love it. But I do love how he's clutching on to this handful of really important items. You know, his pants are down and he's in his bathrobe, but boy, I hope that candelabra really was what he wanted to take with him. So you want to make sure that you know what you need so that you can get those things, but you also want to be open to the other things that are going to make you better. So find those flexibilities. Think broadly about what you're going to need to be productive and happy in any given position, and make sure you're advocating for yourself to get as many of them as you possibly can. This is not easy, but it is very, very worth it. And remember, in 9 times out of 10, unless you are dealing with a very skilled negotiator, which you might, they are just as anxious as you are. Job searches, finding people, hiring people is a very difficult process with lots of questions and lots of ambiguities. At the point that they are making you an offer, they want you. And so engaging in this process, both parties are likely to be a little bit nervous, but stay confident, stay likable, make sure that you articulate why you deserve it. Make sure that they can justify this, and make sure that you have presented them with enough flexibilities that they can give you lots of different ways to pay, and you're very likely to get a package that best suits your needs at this point in your career. Use our resources. You Chicago grad, you know, one of the best ways to practice that conversation, especially that 10 seconds of silence, is to actually do it, and to do it with a stranger. You know, it's always tempting to call up your best friend and be like, hey, would you practice salary negotiations with me? Well, your best friend wants to give you in this fictional world everything you want. Try and find someone you know a little less. Try and find someone you know who's a little more hard-nosed. Try and find someone you know that seems to always be able to do these kind of things, and ask, would you be willing to just have a 15-minute practice negotiation conversation with me? It will really help. GraduCon is coming up. I'll be doing a similar presentation at that as well, and for anyone who's invited to join, please feel free to come and sit in again. You can use all of these resources to help you throughout your job search, but I know these folks and they would, I'm sure, be happy to help you practice this. You're also welcome to email me. I love to talk about this stuff. Every negotiation situation is a little bit different, and I've done my best to give you a very general overview of how this can work best for you. But again, you're going to find yourself in specific contexts that have really unique little aspects that you want to work with. Email me. I love to talk through strategies for this kind of stuff, and I am happy to do so. So I hope that some of you are definitely in touch as you're at this point in your life. Okay, so I am going to start looking at the questions. I apologize, I am new to this webinar technology, but I will do my best. So to return to this question of how do you negotiate when you've been in a job for a little bit. So when you're starting at a job, you have more power, but you have less information, which is to say, you are the one that they want, but you know much less about the internal workings of the organization, what it's possible to advocate for, what other people have gotten, and really what the priorities are for your specific supervisor and boss than you do when you're in a continuing job. That said, when you're in an existing job, you have less power because it's unlikely, unless you're issuing an ultimatum, which is a bad idea, it's unlikely that you would leave a current position over this, so you have less power. That said, you have much more information, and that information can be used to your advantage. If you're considering negotiating in an existing job, first off, if you're considering leaving an existing job that you are otherwise happy and is otherwise a productive environment, consider the costs and benefits of applying for a new job versus negotiating on the job that you're in. They're about equivalent amounts of work, and if you are in a pretty good situation, but if you could just get these few things, it would be more likely you could stay on longer term, it's worth negotiating with your supervisor. What you want to do is, everybody, this is pretty standard advice that you want to make yourself a new job description. You want to talk about all of the things that you do now that you weren't able to do when you started, and any new projects you've taken on, any more responsibilities you've taken on. All of these things should get added into a new job description. You want to research how much that expanded job might be worth on the market. Again, look at other job postings, look at job postings for your superiors, look at job postings at other organizations that are serious. What you're trying to figure out is, what would it cost to hire this job at another organization? The other piece, and this is the piece people usually skip, but it's really important, is when you've made that list of your expanded responsibilities, at the same time, look at the organizational priorities, either at your office level or the organizational level, to figure out what is it they are really trying to accomplish, and then revisit the responsibilities you've taken on and figure out how many of them specifically speak to those objectives. It's great if you are on 1,006 committees at your institution. However, if your boss really doesn't care that you have been helping to chair the graduation gown committee or whatever, that's not going to be a compelling reason to pay you more. What you want to do is speak to her needs of why you are more valuable to her because you speak to a directive objective need. I recommend think carefully about when you schedule this conversation. Performance reviews are a very natural time to do it, but you also want to make sure that you schedule it at a time when he or she does not have a lot on their plate. Otherwise, someone who is busy and stressed out does not want to go through this extra work for you. But find a time that's good, sit down and present your proposal, and then offer to work with them to bring this proposal to a higher level if they are not the direct one that could approve it. And if you're at all concerned about making this proposal when they themselves would like to be negotiating for better, offer to help them. If you have that kind of professional relationship, it can be really useful for you to say, you know, I've put all of this work together and I really think we're both worth more to this organization. What would you think about collaborating on a proposal that gets us both a little bit more of X, Y, and Z? Okay. So I answered the resources question. Hopefully, I am always on the lookout for new ones. So if you in your own research have had great success with them, please send them along. Is negotiation a standard practice at nonprofits or at universities? Yes. Negotiation is standard practice almost everywhere. It is very rare that someone will give you the absolute maximum they can possibly pay you in the first offer because, again, remember, they are trying to get you for the lowest amount possible. So they're not usually going to blow their entire budget on you in the first go-round. It is very, very common to find somewhere in the middle between two numbers. If one has a medical condition that will require they need to work only a certain number of hours, should you mention this in some way as part of the negotiation or keep this to yourself and spring it on them later? This is a great question and a really difficult one. This is one of those very deeply contextual questions. It's how you want to approach it. I personally would not want to work with someone who had withheld that kind of information from me until I had already committed the offer. I personally would appreciate working with someone who was upfront about what should be a documented need so that we could find the best way to be flexible as an organization to serve them. I would be interested to know, and please feel free to write to me, if that medical condition was covered under the ADA Compliance Act. If you are going to be talking about this in negotiations, this would be something that you could potentially bring up earlier than your counter offer. This would be something that you could potentially bring up when they make your initial offer to let them know that this is something that will need to be discussed and resolved before you are able to accept the position, and you want to give them as much time to think about it as you can. That you're happy to provide any documentation, and you should be prepared to do that in this case. But you know, if you have a medical condition that means that you are otherwise able to complete this job, but you are going to need X, Y, and Z provision, that sounds, you know, like an accommodation to me, and I think that would be well within your bounds to be insistent about needing that to do your job. Let's say my current job has a lot of perks. Do I need to add those into the salary base when they insist on finding out a number? Well, do those perks impact your quality of life? Or are you going to expect to have that same amount of money? I actually have personal experience with doing this. When I, again, applied for this job, I was forced to list my salary at the organization that I was at, but what I did was that I had a second job. I had been given the flexibility to do it during work hours, but that was a big chunk of my income at the time. And so when I was in negotiations, I was put in the uncomfortable position of them offering me a salary based on my base pay and me coming back and saying, actually, my salary is really this. I made all sorts of mistakes in that conversation. You did not use me as an example, though I do bring these up just to remind you that this stuff is difficult and it's easy to make mistakes. But if you are expecting that your future package would be similar to what you have, then yes, that is definitely included in your base salary or should be discussed as an opportunity for you to make more. Any specific comments about academic jobs, especially for the humanities? Any idea about the differences in salaries with respect to other fields? Oh man, that is a great question, and I am not the person to ask it to, because my academic field is the sciences and my current professional field is the physical sciences. I would say this is a conversation that ideally you want to have with someone in your field that you trust. One thing that's great about public universities, I can say specifically, is that they make all salaries available online. So if you're looking at working at those institutions, you have a whole guidebook of how much everybody makes and what the differences are. That might be a great place to start looking. Chronicle of Higher Education, as you're looking at job listings, I would be surprised if some of them didn't include a salary range. But academic jobs, to the best of my understanding, work like any other. You are negotiating for salary packages. You are negotiating for research assistants. You are negotiating for office space and tenure track and all of those things. I would encourage you to treat this like you would treat any other position, though I would also encourage you to talk to people in your field that can give you perhaps more specific advice. Any tips for females who are planning to have kids in the next 5 years? How do you negotiate family leave? Well, family leave is a guaranteed privilege, albeit a not great one in the United States. You know, 5 years is a long time, and you may be on the perfect track to do that, and that may happen. I would say that negotiating for a privilege that you would receive within 5 years is, while I commend thinking ahead, that is thinking a little too far ahead. That said, I think one of the questions you can be asking in your counteroffer is what the maternity leave situation is like, how have other employees balanced family and child. Does, you know, if you could ask to have the opportunity to speak with a few employees who are themselves mothers and ask how the organization has been approaching them. You know, this kind of question, I think, it's less about negotiation and it's much more about you finding an organization that's going to support what you're going to need as a mom. And so you're going to want to find out what's it like to be a mom here? What are the expectations? Where is there flexibility that I might be able to find? But I would say table that conversation until there is a pressing 9-month need to have it. And that's when you want to get into that situation. One more.
If you don't mind, oh, I'm so sorry. This is Maggie. If you don't mind if I just jump in, it looks like we're butting right up on time, and we have had a number of other questions come in. So if you're open to it, we're happy to send those questions to you in the next few minutes here via email and get any responses back to the submitters after today's webinar, if that works for you.
That definitely does.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you again, Emily, for this terrific presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our attendees did as well. As a reminder to everyone else, please do watch your email for a link to the recording of today's presentation, along with a follow-up survey. And thanks again for joining us. We also invite you to join us online at careers.uchicagoalumni.org or grad.uchicago.edu. To find other career resources from both our office and from UChicago Grad. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And